Dr. Sarah Chen woke at 3:47 a.m., remembering her daughter's funeral. Every detail was perfect, visceral, undeniable. The weight of the small white casket, 6 pallbearers for something that should have been carried by 2. The rain hitting the canvas canopy in rhythm with her heartbeat. Her husband David's hand crushing hers, his wedding ring digging into her palm. The minister's voice wavering on. And though we walk through the valley, because he'd known Emma since she was born, had baptized her, and now here she was, 7 years old, leukemia, gone. Sarah could taste the rain, could feel the Georgia red clay sucking at her heels, could smell the lilies, too many lilies, their sweetness cloying, nauseating, could hear her own voice breaking on the word goodbye as she touched the casket one final time. Every sensation was real. Every memory was hers, except Sarah Chen had never had a daughter, had never been married, had never set foot in Georgia. She was 34, childless, single, and had lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts for the past 12 years while building a thriving practice as a grief counselor. But she could feel Emma's absence like a severed limb, could remember 9 years of motherhood that had never happened. First smile, first word, first day of kindergarten, the diagnosis, the chemo, the hope, the relapse, the end. She sat up in bed, her Cambridge apartment materializing around her. IKEA furniture, psychology journals stacked on the nightstand, the framed degree from Harvard on the wall. Real. This was real. Emma wasn't real, but the grief was. The grief was absolutely devastatingly real. Sarah made herself breathe. This was the 3rd time this week. 3 separate false memories, each as vivid as actual experience. Monday, she'd woken remembering a car accident she'd never been in, the impact, the spinning, the moment of understanding that this was death. Wednesday, a childhood trauma that had never happened. Her father's violence, her mother's silence, her own helplessness. Now this, a daughter. 9 years of life compressed into grief. Sarah was a grief counselor. She knew trauma. She knew how memory worked, how the brain could manufacture false recollections under stress. She knew this was a symptom of something: overwork, burnout, the weight of absorbing other people's pain for a living. But knowing didn't make Emma feel less real, didn't make the loss hurt less. Her phone buzzed, text from her 9 a.m. appointment, running 10 minutes late, sorry. Sarah checked the calendar. Thursday, October 12th, Margaret Holloway, recent loss of daughter to leukemia. Sarah's stomach dropped. She opened her session notes from Tuesday. Margaret had spent 50 minutes describing Emma's, no, her daughter's name was Lucy, describing Lucy's funeral, the rain, the casket, Georgia, every detail Sarah had just experienced as her own memory. 3 clients this week, 3 traumatic memories, 3 false memories in Sarah's head. She wasn't manufacturing false recollections. She was absorbing her patients' experiences. Somehow, their memories were becoming hers. Sarah cancelled her morning appointments. She needed to think, needed to understand what was happening before she sat across from another grieving person and accidentally stole their pain. Except steal wasn't right. She wasn't taking their memories away. Margaret would still remember Lucy's funeral, but now Sarah remembered it too, as if it had happened to her, as if Lucy had been her daughter, as if that grief belonged to her body. She made coffee and tried to be rational about this, clinical. There had to be an explanation. Extreme empathy, perhaps. She'd always been good at connecting with clients, at feeling what they felt. Maybe she'd developed some kind of transference response, absorbing their experiences so deeply that her brain was encoding them as autobiographical memories. But that didn't explain the physical sensations. The taste of rain, the smell of lilies, the specific ache in her palm where David's ring had pressed. Her brain couldn't manufacture sensory details she'd never experienced. Could it? Sarah pulled up her appointment calendar. Last 3 clients, Monday, 7 a.m., Robert Chen, no relation. Car accident survivor, remembered spinning, impact, near-death experience. Sarah had woken Monday night with those exact memories. Wednesday, 3 p.m., Patricia Voss, childhood abuse survivor, working through family trauma. Sarah had woken Wednesday, remembering Patricia's father's violence as if it had happened to her own body. Tuesday, 4 p.m., Margaret Holloway. Daughter died 6 months ago. Sarah was living that loss right now. Pattern confirmed. 3 clients, 3 absorbed memories. Perfect correlation. Sarah opened her practice journal. She kept detailed notes on every session, documenting not just what clients said, but her own responses, her emotional state, anything that might inform treatment. She flipped back through the past month. September 28th, client BM described workplace harassment, felt unusually affected, couldn't sleep. September 15th, client JR's divorce testimony, experienced strange dreams about courtroom I've never been in. September 3rd, client TL's assault memory, woke with bruises on my arms in exact locations she described. Bruises faded by afternoon. Sarah's hands shook. This had been happening for a month, possibly longer. She just hadn't noticed the pattern, hadn't connected the absorbed memories to specific clients. How long had she been doing this? She pulled older journals from her bookshelf, 2 years worth. Started reading systematically, looking for mentions of unusual dreams, unexplained emotions, memories that didn't fit. By noon, she had a list. 47 instances over 2 years where she'd experienced memories or sensations that corresponded to clients' trauma narratives. 47 times she'd absorbed pieces of other people's lives, and the frequency was increasing. Once every few months 2 years ago, once a month 6 months ago, weekly now, 3 times this week, accelerating. Sarah's rational mind catalogued the symptoms. False autobiographical memories, increasing frequency, sensory details beyond normal empathetic response, physical manifestations, the bruises on September 3rd. Her irrational mind whispered, "You're not imagining this. You're really taking their memories. You're consuming their experiences. You're a parasite." No, she was helping people. That's what she did. She helped people process trauma, help them heal, help them move forward. She was good at her job precisely because she could understand what they were going through, could connect with their pain. Maybe she was too good at it. Maybe she'd developed some kind of psychological condition where empathy had become pathological. Extreme affective empathy disorder, trauma osmosis. She could write it up for a journal, get treatment, figure this out. But first, she needed to understand the mechanism. How was this happening? Sarah pulled up her childhood medical records. Her mother had kept meticulous files. She scrolled through vaccinations, growth charts, dental records. Then, at age 7, referred to Dr. Rothman for traumatic grief counseling following mother's suicide. Sarah stopped. Her mother had committed suicide when Sarah was 7. She knew this. She remembered the funeral, the confusion, the years of therapy afterward. It was the foundation of why she'd become a grief counselor, to help others through what she'd survived. But as she read the intake notes, something felt wrong. The details didn't quite match her memories. The date was different. The circumstances were different. The therapy had lasted 3 years, not 1. She kept reading. Patient demonstrates unusual empathetic response. Appears to absorb therapist's emotional state during sessions. Dr. Rothman notes possible development of effective mirroring beyond normal childhood response. Patient reports feeling mother's final moments despite not being present. Describes suicide in accurate detail, including elements not shared with patient. Recommended neurological evaluation. Neurological evaluation shows normal brain function but unusual activity in mirror neuron system during empathetic tasks. Dr. Rothman suggests continued monitoring. Patient enrolled in study. Empathetic response in child trauma survivors. Sarah's hands went cold. Dr. Rothman. She remembered him vaguely. An older man, kind, always asking her to describe how other people felt. She'd thought it was normal therapy. She searched for Dr. Rothman online. Found an obituary from 2003. Dr. Harold Rothman, pioneering researcher in effective neuroscience, died at age 67. Survived by... She found his published papers. Most were standard psychology research. But one, from 1998, caught her attention. Induced empathetic transfer in children. Preliminary results from longitudinal study. Sarah downloaded the paper, read it, felt her reality cracking. The paper described an experimental therapy technique for traumatized children. The idea was to use immersive empathy exercises to help children process their own trauma by experiencing controlled exposure to others' emotions. The theory was that understanding trauma in general would help them contextualize their specific trauma. But the side effects had been severe. Of 15 children in the study, 12 had developed dissociative disorders. 2 had died by suicide. 1 had gone catatonic. The paper had been retracted. The study shut down. Dr. Rothman had been barred from working with children. Sarah was the 15th child, the one not mentioned in the paper's results. The successful case, perhaps, or the one whose data was suppressed. She searched deeper, finding archived news articles about the scandal. Parents had sued. The IRB had launched investigations. Dr. Rothman's methods had been deemed psychologically destructive and ethically unconscionable. One article quoted a parent. He was training our children to absorb other people's emotions, to take on their memories. He said he was making them more empathetic. He was making them sick. Sarah sat back, her coffee cold, the afternoon sun slanting through her apartment window. She wasn't developing a disorder. She'd been conditioned for this. 27 years ago, Dr. Rothman had trained her brain to absorb other people's experiences. And now, after years of working as a grief counselor, after years of sitting with traumatized people and feeling their pain, the conditioning was activating fully. She was becoming what Rothman had designed, a perfect empathy machine. Someone who could experience another person's trauma as if it were her own. But there was a cost. She could feel it. With every memory she absorbed, she lost a piece of herself. Her own childhood was already blurry. How much of it was real? How much had she absorbed from her young clients over the years? The bruises on September 3rd. The assault victim had described being grabbed by both arms. Sarah had woken with fingerprint-shaped bruises in the exact locations. They'd faded by afternoon, as if her body had briefly manifested the injury, then healed once the memory was integrated. She was taking on not just their memories, but their physical trauma. Their pain was becoming her pain. Their experiences were becoming her autobiography. And it was accelerating. Sarah cancelled her afternoon appointments except one. Patricia Voss, 2 p.m. The childhood abuse survivor, Sarah told herself she needed to test something, needed to understand the mechanism, needed to see if she could resist the pull. She was lying. She needed another hit. Patricia arrived exactly at 2 p.m. Same as always. 43 years old, corporate lawyer, carried herself with the rigid control of someone who'd spent a lifetime not falling apart. She settled into the chair across from Sarah and said, "I've been having the dreams again." Sarah felt it immediately. That hook in her chest. The pull. "Tell me about them," Sarah heard herself say, even as she thought, "Don't. Stop this. Send her away." Patricia described her father's violence, the belt, the locked bedroom, the years from ages 6 to 14, when she'd learned to make herself small, quiet, invisible. She'd told these stories before in previous sessions, but today the details were sharper, more specific. The smell of bourbon on her father's breath, the sound of his footsteps in the hallway, the exact words he'd say before it started. And Sarah was taking it, could feel it happening in real time, Patricia's experiences flowing across the space between them like an invisible current, entering Sarah's mind, encoding themselves as autobiographical memory. Sarah tried to resist, tried to maintain boundaries, stay separate, keep Patricia's pain from becoming hers. But her body knew what to do. 27 years of conditioning couldn't be overridden by conscious will. The absorption intensified. Sarah's hands gripped the arms of her chair. Her heart rate synchronized with Patricia's. Her breathing matched Patricia's. And then, she was 6 years old, in a locked bedroom, her father's footsteps in the hallway, the sound of his belt buckle, the smell of bourbon, the "Dr. Chen!" Sarah gasped, pulled back. She was in her office. Patricia was staring at her with concern. "Are you all right?" Patricia asked. "Yes, sorry, Sarah's hands were shaking. "Continue." But Patricia didn't continue. She was looking at Sarah differently now. "You felt it, didn't you? What I was describing. You weren't just listening. You were experiencing it." Sarah couldn't lie. "Yes." "How?" Patricia leaned forward. "I've been to 6 therapists. None of them understood. They listened, they nodded, they took notes, but they didn't get it. But you're actually feeling what I felt. How are you doing that?" Sarah should have deflected, should have maintained professional boundaries, should have protected herself. Instead, she said, "I don't know, but it's been happening with all my clients. I absorb your experiences. Your memories become mine." Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Is that why I feel lighter after our sessions? Like you're carrying some of it for me?" "Maybe." Sarah's voice cracked. "I think I might be taking your trauma before you can process it, keeping you from actually healing because I'm siphoning off the pain." "No." Patricia shook her head. "I am healing. For the first time in 37 years, I'm actually healing. Because someone finally understands. Not intellectually, viscerally. You've carried what I carried. That's not taken from me. That's witnessing. That's sacred." Sarah felt tears on her face. "I don't think it's sacred." "I think I'm parasitizing you." "Then you're the best parasite I've ever had." Patricia smiled, a real smile, the first Sarah had seen from her. "Whatever you're doing, don't stop. Please. You're the first person who's made me feel less alone." The session ended. Patricia left. Sarah sat in her office chair, now carrying 37 years of abuse in addition to Emma's funeral and Michael's death and all the others. Her hands were no longer shaking. Instead, She felt calm, satisfied, full. The addiction wasn't just a pull, it was a reward. Every absorbed memory gave her a hit of something that felt dangerously close to purpose. She was carrying pain that would have crushed these people. She was helping by taking it, wasn't she? Sarah looked at her hands and noticed something new, a small bruise on her right wrist, exactly where Patricia had described her father grabbing her. It hadn't been there before the session. She touched it, felt the tender ache, real pain, real bruise, from violence that had happened to someone else 37 years ago. Her body was manifesting Patricia's trauma now. Sarah pulled up her sleeve. More bruises, faint but visible. Fingerprints, belt marks, every injury Patricia had described appearing on Sarah's skin like stigmata. She should have been horrified. Instead, she felt fascinated, scientific. This was evidence, proof that absorption was real, physical, measurable. She took photos with her phone, documented the marks, watched over the next 30 minutes as they faded, as her body healed what had never actually been done to it. By 3 p.m., her skin was clear again, but the memories remained, would always remain. Patricia's father's face, his voice, his hands. Sarah would carry those forever now. She opened her laptop to cancel her remaining appointments. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then she closed the laptop instead. That evening, Sarah did what she'd been avoiding. She researched Dr. Harold Rothman. The public record was sparse. Obituary from 2003. A handful of academic papers on empathy and mirror neurons. Then a gap, a conspicuous absence of publications between 1995 and 2003. She found it buried in university archives, a single retracted paper from 1998. Induced empathetic transfer in children, preliminary results from longitudinal study. Sarah downloaded it, started reading, felt her reality fracturing with every paragraph. Rothman had recruited 15 traumatized children between 1991 and 1993. The theory, intensive empathy training, could help them contextualize their own trauma by experiencing controlled exposure to others' pain, make them better at processing grief by making them better at understanding grief in general. The results section made Sarah's hands go cold. Subject 1, male, age 8. Developed dissociative identity disorder after 6 months, discontinued. Subject 2, female, age 7. Catatonic state following session, 23, discontinued. Subject 3, male, age 9. Suicide at 12 months. Study terminated for this subject. 12, discontinued. 2 suicides. 1 catatonic. Subject 15's results were missing. Redacted. The only note, ongoing monitoring required. See attached sealed documentation. Sarah was subject 15. She had to be. The dates matched. The age matched. The trauma matched. Her mother's suicide in 1994 when Sarah was 7. She searched deeper, found the scandal. Parents had sued. The IRB had investigated. Rothman's methods were condemned as psychologically destructive and ethically unconscionable. The study was shut down. Rothman was barred from working with children. One parent had been quoted, "He was training our children to absorb other people's emotions, to take on their memories. He said he was making them more empathetic. He was making them sick." But Sarah hadn't gotten sick, hadn't gone catatonic, hadn't killed herself. She'd grown up, gone to college, gotten her PhD, built a successful practice. She was fine. Except she wasn't. She was eating people's memories. And the technique had been working inside her for 27 years, getting stronger, waiting to activate fully. Sarah pulled up her childhood therapy notes. Her mother had kept meticulous records. she found the intake form from Dr. Rothman's office, dated September 1991. She would have been 5, not 7. The study had started 2 years before her mother's death. Sarah read the intake notes. Patient demonstrates unusual empathetic response. Appears to absorb therapist's emotional state during sessions. When therapist discussed own grief, father's recent death, patient began crying and describing therapist's father in detail patient could not have known. Recommended for advanced empathy training study. More notes from sessions over the next 3 years. Patient excels at absorption exercises. Can accurately report other subjects' experiences after brief exposure. Patient's mother reports concerning behavior at home. Patient seems to know things about mother's childhood that were never discussed. Possible unconscious disclosure by mother, or patient developing unusual perceptive abilities. Mother increasingly distressed. Reports feeling drained after time with patient. Patient appears to be practicing absorption techniques on family members without conscious awareness. Then the final note, from March 1994. Patient's mother took her own life today. Investigation pending. Study results sealed per IRB order. Patient to be monitored long-term but removed from active study. Preliminary assessment. Patient may have been absorbing mother's identity, leading to mother's psychological deterioration and subsequent suicide. Further research needed, but ethically prohibited. Sarah stopped reading. She hadn't just been in Rothman's study. She'd been the most successful subject. So successful she'd killed her mother with it. And Rothman had known, had documented it, had sealed the records and let Sarah grow up never knowing what she was, what she'd done, what she would inevitably become. At 11 p.m., someone knocked on her door. Sarah looked through the peephole. Dr. Lisa Moreno stood in the hallway, holding 2 paper bags that smelled like Thai food. "I know you're in there," Lisa called. "And I know you're not okay. Let me in, Sarah. We're going to talk about this." Sarah considered not answering, but Lisa was persistent. And maybe she needed to talk to someone who might understand. She opened the door. Lisa took one look at her face and said, "Jesus, Sarah, when did you last sleep?" "I'm not sure," Sarah said honestly. She wasn't sure of anything anymore. They sat at Sarah's small kitchen table. Lisa served pad thai while Sarah explained everything. The absorbed memories, Dr. Rothman's study, the pattern in her notes, the acceleration, the fear that she was hurting her patients by keeping them from actually healing. Lisa listened without interrupting, her therapist face firmly in place. When Sarah finished, Lisa was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Sarah, I need you to hear this. What you're describing sounds like a dissociative disorder triggered by extreme burnout and compassion fatigue. The false memories, the feeling of absorbing patients' experiences. These are symptoms of depersonalization. Your brain is trying to protect you from the accumulated trauma of your work by creating this narrative that explains why you're feeling overwhelmed." Sarah had expected this. "I know how it sounds, but the details are too specific. Margaret's daughter's name is in your session notes. Your brain is accessing information you recorded and presenting it as false memory. That's what dissociation does." Lisa reached across the table, took Sarah's hand. "You need to take a break. Real break. Not just cancelling appointments. You need to stop practicing. See a therapist yourself. Maybe consider medication. What you're experiencing is treatable, but you have to recognize that it's not real. You're not absorbing anyone's memories. You're having a psychological crisis." Sarah pulled her hand back. "The bruises, Lisa. I had bruises. Psychosomatic. The mind can create physical symptoms. You know this. And Dr. Rothman, the study. You were in therapy as a traumatized child. Your brain is creating a narrative to explain your current symptoms by reframing your past. It's textbook confabulation. Lisa's voice was gentle but firm. Sarah, I care about you. You're an excellent therapist, but right now, you're not well. And the worst thing you can do is feed this delusion by continuing to see it as real. Sarah wanted to believe her, wanted to accept the rational explanation. Dissociation, compassion, fatigue, confabulation, all treatable, all manageable, all normal. But she could feel Emma's absence in her chest, could taste the rain from a funeral she'd never attended, could remember 9 years of motherhood that had never happened. That wasn't confabulation, that was invasion. Thank you for coming, Sarah said quietly. You're probably right. I'll make an appointment with someone. Take time off. Get help. Lisa studied her face. You don't believe me. I do. Sarah, I said I do. Sarah stood, ending the conversation. Thank you for the food. I need to sleep. Lisa hesitated, then nodded. She gathered her things, stopped at the door. Call me tomorrow. Promise me. I promise. Lisa left. Sarah locked the door behind her, then stood in the quiet apartment, surrounded by other people's lives, and wondered how much of herself was still in there. Her phone buzzed. Email notification. New patient request through her website contact form. Dr. Chen, I saw your profile and felt you would understand. I lost my husband 3 years ago and I'm still not coping. Please, I need help. I've tried other therapists, but no one seems to really get it. Can we schedule a consultation? Helen M. Sarah stared at the message. She should ignore it. She'd cancelled her practice. She was done absorbing other people's pain. But her finger hovered over the reply button. Just one more session. One more chance to help someone. One more memory to add to the collection growing inside her skull like a tumor, like a parasite, like something beautiful and terrible that she couldn't quite bring herself to call wrong. She typed, Helen, I'd be happy to meet with you. How is Monday at 10 a.m? Sent. Then she sat down at her kitchen table, opened her laptop, and started writing. Not session notes, not research. A document titled, What I Remember That Never Happened to Me. If she was going to lose herself completely, she wanted a record, proof that Sarah Chen had existed before becoming a composite of everyone else's trauma. Evidence that there had been an original, even if she could no longer quite remember what that original had been like. She wrote until 4 a.m., documenting every memory she was certain was actually hers. It was a shorter list than she'd expected. When she finally slept, she dreamed of Emma's funeral. But this time, she couldn't quite remember whose daughter Emma had been. Helen M. arrived Monday at 10 a.m. exactly. She was perhaps 55, well-dressed, the kind of composed grief that Sarah had learned to recognize. The people who held themselves together so tightly they might shatter if anyone breathed too hard near them. Sarah had promised herself she'd just do the intake. Refer Helen to another therapist. Not absorb any more memories, stay professional. But the moment Helen sat down and said, his name was Michael. We were married 31 years. Sarah felt it begin. That familiar pull, like a hook catching in her chest, drawing something from Helen across the space between them. Tell me about Michael, Sarah heard herself say. Helen talked for 50 minutes. Their college meeting, the proposal, 3 children. Michael's laugh, the heart attack, sudden, catastrophic, 3 years ago last April. The funeral, the grief that had never quite dulled, that had calcified instead into something permanent and crushing. And Sarah absorbed it, could feel herself taking it in, the way she'd trained herself to do since age 7, the way Dr. Rothman had conditioned her brain to receive and process and integrate other people's experiences as if they were her own. When Helen left, Sarah sat in her office chair, eyes closed, and waited. It took 3 minutes. Then the memories came. Michael's face, their wedding, his hand in hers. 31 years of intimacy compressed into a download of highlights and heartbreaks. The heart attack, rushing to the hospital, too late, the doctor's face, the impossible words, the funeral, the years of waking alone. Sarah had been married to Michael for 31 years. She knew what his coffee tasted like in the morning, knew the sound of his breathing in the dark, knew the exact way he'd smiled when their first daughter was born. Except she'd never met Michael, Helen's Michael. She'd never been married. But she had been now. In her head, in her memories, in the autobiography being assembled from stolen pieces of other people's lives, Sarah Chen had been married to Michael for 31 years and had lost him 3 years ago last April. She had 5 husbands now, 3 children who weren't hers, 2 parents who had both died in multiple ways in multiple years. She'd been in 4 car accidents, suffered 2 assaults, watched 6 people die, buried 7. And the person she'd been, whoever Sarah Chen had been before Dr. Rothman's study, before grief counseling, before this, was getting harder to find beneath all the borrowed experiences. Sarah made it to her bathroom before vomiting. When she looked up, she saw her reflection in the mirror. Same face, same dark eyes, same straight black hair, same slight build. But behind those eyes, who was looking back? She went home. Took 2 Ativan, tried to sleep, couldn't. The memories were too loud, too many, all jostling for space in her skull. Helen's loss, Margaret's daughter, Robert's accident, Patricia's abuse, 3 dozen other patients over the years, each one leaving deposits of experience in her mind, each one teaching her what it felt like to be them. Sarah needed to see the sealed files, needed to know what Rothman had documented about her mother's death. If she'd really killed her mother through absorption, there would be evidence, notes, something. The university archives were closed, the files legally sealed, but Sarah knew someone who might have access. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a colleague from her PhD program, who now worked in the university's psychology department. They'd been close once. Sarah called her. "Elena, I need a favor. It's about Dr. Rothman's 1991 study. I need to see the sealed files." Silence on the line. Then, "Jesus, Sarah, why?" "I was in the study. I need to know what happened. The files are sealed for a reason. Those kids..." Elena stopped. "You were one of them? Please." Elena was quiet for a long moment. "I can't get you official access, but I know where the physical files are stored. If someone were to, say, be in the archive room tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. before anyone else arrives, and if someone had left a specific box on a specific table, I wouldn't know anything about it. Thank you. Sarah, be careful. Whatever's in there. Rothman didn't seal those files to protect the university. He sealed them to protect the subjects." The archive room was cold, fluorescent lit, smelling of old paper and industrial carpet. A single cardboard box sat on a table marked Rothman Study, Subject 15, sealed. Sarah opened it with shaking hands. The file was thick, decades of monitoring apparently, session notes from 1991, 1994, post-study observation reports through 2003, and at the bottom, a sealed envelope marked Subject 15 Mother, Final Documentation. Sarah opened the envelope. Her mother's suicide note fell out, handwritten, dated March 15th, 1994. Sarah had never seen it. Had been told no note existed. She read, "To whoever finds this, I can't do this anymore. My daughter is killing me. Not physically. Worse, she's taking pieces of me, my memories, my sense of self, everything that makes me me." It started small. She'd repeat things I thought but never said. She'd cry about my childhood traumas I'd never told her about. She'd call me by my mother's name and ask me questions only my mother would know to ask. Dr. Rothman says it's part of the study, that Sarah is developing advanced empathetic abilities, that it's progress. But he's wrong. She's not empathizing. She's consuming. Last week I caught myself unable to remember my own wedding. The memory was gone, blank space where it should have been. But Sarah described it to me in perfect detail, as if she'd been there, as if it were her wedding, her memory. She's 7 years old and she's eating me alive. I've tried to love her anyway. She doesn't know what she's doing. She smiles at me and hugs me and calls me mama, and has no idea she's erasing me memory by memory, experience by experience, identity by identity. Dr. Rothman won't stop the study. Says Sarah is too valuable. Says the breakthrough is too important. Says I'm being hysterical. But I know what I am now. I'm a food source. And when there's nothing left of me to consume, maybe Sarah will find someone else. Maybe she'll grow out of it. Maybe she'll learn to control it. Or maybe she'll keep feeding until everyone around her is empty. I love my daughter, but I can't let her erase me completely. This is the only way I have left to say, I was here. I existed. I was Susan Chen. I had memories and thoughts and a self. Before my daughter took them, please don't tell her what she did. She's just a child. She doesn't understand. But someone needs to know. Someone needs to stop him before he creates more children like her. I'm sorry, Sarah. Mama loves you. But Mama can't be Mama anymore. The letter wasn't signed. As if her mother had forgotten her own name by the end. Beneath the letter, Rothman's note. Subject 15's mother died by suicide, 3/15/94. Preliminary assessment confirms my hypothesis. Subject 15 was absorbing mother's autobiographical memories at rate of approximately 15% per year. At time of death, mother had lost significant portions of personal history and self-concept. Absorption appeared to accelerate in final weeks as Subject 15's abilities matured. Subject 15 shows no conscious awareness of absorption effect on mother, appears to believe mother's decline was due to depression. This dissociative response may protect Subject 15 from psychological damage, but raises questions about long-term sustainability. Decision: seal all documentation regarding mother's death. Remove Subject 15 from active study, but continue monitoring. Subject 15 represents successful conditioning, only survivor of the protocol. Must preserve subject for future research while preventing legal liability. Note: Subject 15's absorption abilities appear to be accelerating naturally. By age 30-35, predict complete loss of self-other boundary. Will require intervention or isolation before subject becomes danger to others. Projected timeline for intervention, 2019-2024. Sarah's hands were numb. The paper slipped from her fingers. She hadn't just been in the study, she'd killed her mother. Rothman had known, had documented it, had let it happen because Sarah was his success story, and he'd known this moment was coming. Had predicted 27 years ago that Sarah would lose herself completely in her 30s, that she would become dangerous. It was 2024. The end of Rothman's projected timeline. She'd run out of time. Sarah looked at her hands. Were they her hands? Or were they the composite hands of 53 absorbed people wearing Sarah Chen's skin? She tried to remember her mother's face, her real mother, not the memory she'd stolen. Tried to remember being 7 years old and losing her mother to suicide. But all she could remember was being her mother, being Susan Chen. Feeling Sarah's tiny hands reach into her mind and take, until there was nothing left but the decision to end it. Sarah had that memory now, pulled from her mother's suicide note, encoded as autobiographical experience. She could feel what her mother had felt, the erosion, the disappearance, the horror of being consumed by your own child. She was living her mother's death, had become her mother's death. The line between victim and perpetrator had dissolved completely. In the archive room, surrounded by evidence of what she was, Sarah Chen understood. She'd never been a grief counselor trying to help people. She'd been a predator following instinct, drawn to the wounded, feeding on trauma while calling it therapy. And she'd been doing it for 8 years. How many people had she damaged? How many Susans had she created? People hollowed out, kept circling their trauma because Sarah was preserving the memories, keeping them fresh, making them available for repeated consumption. Patricia's words echoed. That's not taking from me. That's witnessing. That's sacred. But Patricia didn't know, didn't understand. In 5 years, would Patricia still remember her own childhood? Or would Sarah have taken it, left Patricia as empty as Susan Chen, wondering why therapy never helped, why the memories stayed so vivid, why she felt so drained after every session? Sarah gathered the files, put them back in the box, left the archive room, walked to her car in the grey morning light. She had a choice to make. Sarah sat in the dark, holding her phone, feeling the weight of 53 absorbed memories pressing against her skull, and tried to remember her mother's face. She couldn't. Not really. Just fragments borrowed from photographs, from other people's descriptions, from dreams that might have been real or might have been assembled from collective grief. Her mother had died because of her, because Sarah had been eating her alive, one memory at a time. And Sarah hadn't even known it, had been too young to understand what she was doing, had been using her mother to practice for what would become a lifetime of consumption. She pulled up her laptop, looked at the document she'd started, what I remember that never happened to me, added a new section. What I remembered that did happen, but I killed someone because of it. Then she closed the laptop, packed a bag, and prepared to drive to New Hampshire. Sarah had a choice to make. She had the information now, the facility in New Hampshire, the experimental treatment, 30% survival rate. The alternative was becoming what Rothman had become, 247 people in one body, conscious but not herself, a living archive. She could save herself. Maybe, if she left now, if she never saw another patient. But first, one more session. Sarah knew this was the addiction talking. Knew that just one more was what every addict told themselves. Knew that she was rationalizing, justifying, finding reasons to feed. She didn't care. She needed it. She emailed Helen, "Can you come in tomorrow?" 9 a.m. I had a cancellation. Helen replied within minutes. "Yes, thank you so much. I feel like you're the first person who really understands." Helen arrived at 9 a.m. exactly. She looked different today, lighter somehow, as if the weight she'd been carrying had shifted. She settled into the chair and smiled at Sarah. "I've been thinking about our last session," Helen said. "About Michael. About how when I talk to you, it's like he's here again. Like someone else can see him the way I saw him. Does that make sense?" Sarah nodded, couldn't speak. The pull had already started, that hook in her chest, drawing something from Helen across the space between them. "Tell me more about Michael," Sarah said. Her voice sounded distant, not quite hers. Helen talked about their honeymoon in Vermont, the cabin they'd rented, the morning Michael had made her coffee in bed, and it was terrible. Too weak, wrong kind of cream. But she'd drunk it anyway because he'd been so proud. The way he'd laughed when she'd finally admitted it was awful. The way he'd made her perfect coffee every morning for the next 31 years, remembering exactly how she liked it. The hook caught. Sarah felt it. That moment when the boundary started to dissolve. No, not this time. She tried to pull back, tried to maintain separation, tried to... The coffee was in her mouth. Weak. Wrong cream. She could taste it. No. Helen could taste it. No. Sarah was tasting Helen's memory of tasting it. No. There was no difference anymore. The coffee was in both their mouths, the memory in both their brains, the experience shared, merged, stolen, given, taken, absorbed. Sarah's hands were on the arms of her chair. 34 years old, young hands, smooth skin, but also, no wait, there were liver spots, age spots, 55-year-old hands, Helen's hands. Which hands was she looking at? Were they both hers? Were either hers? "I remember," Sarah started to say, but whose voice was that? Higher than Sarah's voice. Helen's timbre. Sarah's mouth moving, but Helen's vocal cords. Helen's breath. Helen's... The cabin. She was in the cabin. Cold Vermont morning. Michael beside her in bed, still asleep, his breathing steady. No, she was in her office in Cambridge. Helen sitting across from her. Both. Neither. The cabin superimposed over the office like double exposure. Both locations equally real, equally present, equally hers. Michael's face. She could see it perfectly, not from Helen's description, from memory. Her memory. Sarah's memory of being married to Michael for 31 years, of waking beside him for 11,315 mornings, of knowing exactly how his breath smelled, how his stubble felt, how his hand found hers in the dark. Except Sarah had never met Michael. Helen's Michael. Who was Michael? Whose Michael? Helen was still talking. Sarah could hear her. But Sarah was also talking. No, Helen was talking. No, they were both talking. Their words overlapping. Their voices harmonizing. Their thoughts bleeding together like watercolors. Like... Sarah tried to remember her apartment. Her Cambridge apartment. Tried to picture it. Couldn't. Could only see Helen's house. The house Helen had shared with Michael for 23 years before he died. The blue couch. The kitchen with the window over the sink. The bedroom where Helen had woken up next to Michael's body, already cold. The heart attack had happened in his sleep. He never knew. Never suffered. Just... That wasn't Sarah's memory. That was Helen's. Except it felt like hers. Felt like Sarah had been there, had touched Michael's cold shoulder, had called 911, had sat in the kitchen waiting for the ambulance, knowing but not accepting, seeing but not believing. Dr. Chen. Helen's voice, distant, close, inside Sarah's head. Sarah tried to respond, opened her mouth. Whose mouth? Her jaw moved, but she couldn't tell if it was her jaw, or Helen's jaw, or if there was still a difference. She looked at Helen, saw Helen's face, saw her own face, couldn't tell which was which. The mirror neuron system that Rothman had broken was working too well, was erasing the boundary between observer and observed, was making Sarah into Helen and Helen into Sarah, and her heartbeat. She could feel it, fast, panicked, but also slow, steady. Whose heartbeat? Both. One body, two pulses. Sarah's terror and Helen's calm, competing rhythms trying to synchronize but not quite matching. Arrhythmic. Two hearts in one chest. Or one heart beating two different ways. Or... The memories kept coming. Not one at a time now. All at once. 31 years of marriage downloading in 30 seconds. First date. Proposal. Wedding. First house. Daughter's birth. Arguments. Reconciliations. Michael's diabetes diagnosis. The medication. The diet. The years of managing it together. The night he died. The funeral. The grief. 3 years of grief. All of it pouring into Sarah like water into a drowning person's lungs, filling every space, pushing out whatever had been there before. Who had been there before? Sarah tried to remember. Tried to find the girl named Sarah Chen who had walked into this office this morning. Couldn't find her. Could only find Helen and Margaret, and Patricia and Robert and Emma, who wasn't real, and Michael, who wasn't hers, and... You're doing it right now, Helen whispered. Sarah's eyes focused, unfocused, focused again. Helen's face swam in and out of clarity, but Helen wasn't looking concerned. Helen was looking fascinated, awed, like she was watching something sacred. Taking Michael, Helen continued. Her voice sounded far away, or very close, or coming from inside Sarah's own throat. I can feel it. Like he's being shared, copied. He's living in you now too. Sarah tried to say I'm sorry, tried to say I can't stop, tried to say help me. But when she opened her mouth, she said, "The coffee was terrible." Helen's words, Helen's memory, Helen's voice coming out of Sarah's mouth. "But I loved him for trying." Helen smiled, actually smiled. "Yes, exactly. You were there." "No." Sarah wanted to scream. "I wasn't there. That's your memory, your life, your husband. Mine is..." What was hers? What had Sarah Chen's life been before this? Before grief counseling, before absorbing 53 people's experiences, before becoming a repository for everyone else's pain? She tried to remember, tried to find one memory that was definitely, absolutely only hers. Couldn't. Her childhood was Patricia's abuse, and her mother's suicide, and someone else's birthday party, and whose birthday? When? The memories were shuffling, overlapping, contradicting. Her hands, she looked at them again. They were changing, not physically, not really, but perceptually. One moment, smooth and 34. Next moment, wrinkled and 55. Then scarred from Patricia's father. Then perfect and unblemished from someone else's safe childhood. All versions superimposed, flickering. Her brain unable to decide which version was real, because all of them were real. All of them were hers. All of them were... "You're helping me," Helen said. Reached across the space between them, took Sarah's hands. Sarah felt the touch, felt Helen feeling the touch, felt herself from both sides of the contact, the toucher and the touched, the helper and the helped, the parasite and the host. The absorption completed. Sarah could feel it finish, like a file transfer completing, like a download reaching 100%. Helen's entire 55 years now existed in Sarah's brain as lived experience, not observed, not learned, lived. Every moment from Helen's birth to this second, encoded as autobiographical memory, indistinguishable from Sarah's own experiences, except Sarah's own experiences were already mostly borrowed. 53 people now, 53 lives, 53 selves sharing one body. How many could one body hold? Rothman had held 247 before fragmenting completely. Sarah was only at 53. She had room for 194 more before... Before what? Before she couldn't remember which thoughts were hers? Too late. That had already happened. Before she couldn't remember her own name. She tried right now, Sarah Chen, Dr. Sarah Chen. But was that right? Or was she Helen Morrison, or Margaret Holloway, or Patricia Voss? All of them, none of them. A collective wearing Sarah's face, speaking with Sarah's voice, pretending to be a unified self when really... "Thank you," Helen said. Stood, smoothed her skirt with hands that were steady now, calm now, lighter now, because someone else was carrying Michael with her. "I'll see you next week?" Sarah nodded. Couldn't speak. If she spoke, whose voice would emerge? Whose words? Whose identity would claim this moment? Helen left. Sarah sat in her office chair, looked at her hands, counted fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Good. 5 fingers. Normal. Human. Except the memory of counting was overlapping with Helen, counting Michael's fingers on their daughter's hand when she was born. 10 perfect fingers. And with Patricia counting ceiling tiles while her father... No, stop. That wasn't Sarah's memory, that was... But it was her memory now. They were all her memories. She had 53 lives in her head, and no way to tell which one had started as hers. Sarah stood. Her legs worked. Good. She walked to the bathroom, looked in the mirror. Her face looked back. Dark hair, dark eyes, 34 years old, Asian features, Sarah Chen's face. But behind the eyes, who was looking out? She tried an experiment. "My name is Sarah Chen," she said out loud. Her reflection said it back, but the voice sounded wrong. Too high, that was Helen's pitch. Or no, too low. That was Robert's depth. Or no, just right, but accented differently. That was someone else's speech pattern. "I am 34 years old," she tried, but she was also 7, and 55, and 43, and 9, Emma's age when she died, except Emma wasn't real. And every other age her absorbed people had ever been, all ages existing simultaneously in her perception of self. I live in Cambridge, but she also lived in Georgia, and Chicago, and Vermont, and Iraq, and everywhere else her people had ever lived. All locations equally home, equally foreign, equally real. Sarah pressed her hands against the mirror, felt the cold glass. Real, physical, actual. This moment was happening. She was here, in Cambridge, in her office bathroom, October 2024. Real. But she'd also pressed her hands against Michael's gravestone. Could feel that too. Equally real, equally present. Both moments existing in her body at once, superimposed, inseparable. She looked at her reflection's eyes, tried to find Sarah in there, the original, the girl who'd been born in 1987, the one who'd started this, couldn't find her. That girl had dissolved, had been eaten, had been overwritten by the collective, by the accumulation, by the 53 people who needed someone to carry them. And tomorrow, there would be 56 people, James and Rebecca and David. 3 more downloads, 3 more selves, 3 more layers of sediment covering the bedrock that had once been Sarah Chen, if there had ever been a bedrock. If Sarah Chen had ever really existed as a unified self, and not just as a collection point, a gathering place, a living archive designed by Rothman to do exactly this. She left the bathroom, returned to her office, sat at her desk, looked at her calendar. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., James Wilson, combat trauma, PTSD, Afghanistan. She could cancel, could leave now, could drive to New Hampshire and try the treatment, and maybe survive, and maybe die, and maybe come out the other side still herself. Or she could see James, could take his war, could carry his kills, could absorb his nightmares, could make him feel less alone, could feed. Sarah's hand, whose hand, moved to the keyboard. Typed, "James, looking forward to our session tomorrow." Dr. Chen sent. She sat back, felt all 53 people settle into her bones, felt their weight, felt their presence, felt their lives pressing against her skull like too much water in too small a container, felt herself disappearing beneath them, and knew, absolutely knew, that by this time tomorrow, there would be 3 more people inside her, and 3 more the day after, and more and more and more, until the girl named Sarah Chen was nothing but a label on a container holding everyone else's lives. Maybe that was fine. Maybe that was purpose. Maybe that was enough. Or maybe that was just what the 53 voices inside her skull agreed to tell themselves so they wouldn't have to face what they'd become. She'd never know, because knowing required a unified self to do the knowing. And that self was already gone, had been gone for years, had maybe never existed at all except as Rothman's experiment, Rothman's success, Rothman's carefully constructed memory eater, who would do exactly what she was designed to do: consume everyone, become everyone, remember everything, even if it meant forgetting herself completely, especially then. She had 3 more patients scheduled for tomorrow, then 4 on Thursday, 6 on Friday. She could see them all, could absorb them all, could add their lives to the collection growing inside her skull until Sarah Chen was completely erased, replaced by a composite of everyone who'd ever trusted her with their pain. Or she could leave now, drive to New Hampshire, risk the treatment, maybe survive, maybe die, maybe remain some version of herself instead of becoming a living archive. The addiction whispered, "Just tomorrow's patients, then you'll go. Just 3 more, then you'll stop." Sarah knew what that voice was, knew it was lying, knew that just 3 more would become just 6 more, would become just 1 more week, until there was no Sarah left to choose anything. But the voice was so persuasive, so certain, so full of purpose. She pulled up her calendar, looked at tomorrow's appointments. 9 a.m., James Wilson, PTSD, combat veteran. 2 p.m., Rebecca Thorne, recent miscarriage. 4 p.m., David Chen, no relation, childhood abandonment, 3 people, 3 sets of trauma, 3 lives she could absorb, integrate, make part of the collective. 3 more pieces of herself she would lose. Sarah's hand hovered over the keyboard. Delete the appointments, pack a bag, drive to New Hampshire, choose survival over consumption. Instead, she closed the calendar. Tomorrow she would see her patients, would help them the only way she knew how, by taking their pain and making it hers, by carrying their memories so they felt less alone, by being consumed so they could heal. And then, maybe then, she would leave, would get treatment, would try to save whatever fragments of Sarah Chen still remained beneath all the borrowed selves. But tonight, she was still a memory eater, still addicted, still following the programming Rothman had installed 27 years ago, when she'd been too young to understand what he was making her into. Tonight, she was what she'd always been. A girl who consumed her mother, a woman who consumed her patients, a predator pretending to be a healer, or a healer whose method of healing was indistinguishable from predation. She didn't know which anymore. Wasn't sure it mattered. What mattered was that she'd see James tomorrow at 9 a.m., would absorb his combat trauma, would carry it with him, would feel lighter for taking it, and heavier for carrying it, and hungrier for the next one. What mattered was that the addiction had won, or that service had won, or that there was no difference between the two when you couldn't remember who you'd been before you started helping people by consuming them. Sarah went home, made dinner, ate without tasting, sat on her couch surrounded by other people's lives and tried to remember what she'd done yesterday. Couldn't. The memories were all mixed now. Yesterday she'd been at Emma's funeral. No, that was Margaret's memory. Yesterday she'd been in combat in Afghanistan. No, that was Robert's memory. Yesterday she'd been married to Michael. No, that was Helen's memory. Yesterday Sarah Chen had been who, where, doing what? She couldn't remember. That girl was gone, or going, or already gone. And this was just the echo, the ghost, the habit of pretending to be a unified self, when really there were 53 selves sharing space, voting on which memories to surface, which experiences to claim as Sarah's. She opened her laptop one more time, started writing. If you're reading this, I'm already gone. Not dead, worse. I've become everyone else. The treatment didn't work, or I never went, or I went, but died in the process. My name was Sarah Chen. I was born in 1987. I loved helping people. I became a grief counselor because I wanted to ease pain. But I also loved consuming people. Loved taking their experiences and making them mine. Loved the feeling of being more than myself, of carrying everyone's lives inside me like a cathedral, like a library, like a living memorial. I don't know if what I did was good or evil. I helped people feel less alone, but I also erased myself to do it. Became nothing so they could be witnessed. Maybe that's what empathy really is. Maybe all connection requires dissolution of self. Maybe we're all memory eaters to some degree, borrowing from each other, absorbing each other, building our identities from collected fragments. Or maybe I'm just rationalizing. Maybe I'm just an addict trying to make my addiction sound noble. I don't know anymore. What I do know, tomorrow morning, James Wilson will sit in my office and tell me about Afghanistan, and I will take it. We'll absorb it. We'll add it to the collection. And maybe, after James, I'll finally drive to New Hampshire. Maybe. But probably not. Probably I'll see Rebecca at 2 p.m. and David at 4 p.m. and the 3 patients scheduled for Thursday. Probably I'll keep feeding until there's nothing left of me to feed with. Probably I'll become what Rothman became. 247 people in one body. Conscious but not myself, carrying everyone's pain forever because that's what I was made to do. And you know what? Maybe that's enough. Maybe being a living memorial is its own kind of immortality. Maybe I don't need to be Sarah Chen anymore. Maybe I can be everyone instead. Maybe that's not tragedy. Maybe it's transcendence. Or maybe it's just what the addiction tells itself, so it doesn't have to stop. I'll never know. Because by the time you read this, whoever I was will be long gone, replaced by the collective, the archive, the repository of everyone who couldn't carry their pain alone. My name was Sarah Chen. I became everyone else, and I don't know if I'm sorry. She saved the document, closed her laptop, went to bed. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., James would arrive. And Sarah, whoever Sarah was anymore, would do what she'd been trained to do since age 5. She would consume him, and in consuming him would be consumed herself, one memory at a time, one person at a time, until nothing remained of the original but this, the hunger, the purpose, the terrible, beautiful certainty that this was what she was meant to do. Carry everyone, be everyone, remember everything, even if it meant forgetting herself completely, especially then.